Okay, so today let's throw together a quick EDH concept deck for Calix Guided by Fate. He's a 2/2 legendary enchantment creature, human druid for 1 green-white that says, when it or another enchantment ETBs under your control, put a 1/1 counter on a target creature. Then, whenever it or an enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may create a token that's a copy of a non-legendary enchantment you control. Do this only once each turn. Now, there are 2 focuses we can have in this deck. We can focus on auras to duplicate other auras and control our opponents and creatures or enhance our own, or we can have a few auras to trigger Calix's ability, but choose to duplicate prime global enchantments to gain their benefits twice. Depending on the global enchantments you choose, you could end up focusing on counters that Calix will generate for your creatures, making them even better attackers to be able to trigger Calix in the first place. Since Calix will put a 1/1 counter on a target creature when an enchantment ETBs, you can take the simple and boring Voltron route, or, like I did in my Zank Voltron control deck, we can let Calix sit back and relax while other creatures get huge and become removal targets instead of our commander. Since our creatures want to get through for damage, in order to create token copies of our enchantments, I want to start with the auras that stop our opponents from blocking. Demotion, Oppressive Raise, Planar Disruption, and Realm Breaker's Grasp are 1 and 2 mana auras that will help us get through to trigger Calix. Alternatively, we can use auras to buff our creatures so our opponents won't want to block them by making them bigger and giving them trample to get past chump blockers. Audacity will do this, but if it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you can draw a card. Citizen Training is more reliable since you get the card when it ETBs, even if you only get +1/+0 in trample for that creature. Armadillo Cloak is great. It costs 1 green-white and will give a creature +2/+2 in trample. Then it says, when the enchanted creature deals combat damage, you gain that much life. This isn't lifelink. It's a triggered ability, so if multiple copies of this aura are on a creature, you'll gain that much life for each copy of this aura. Also, if you choose to enchant your opponent's creatures, you'll be gaining the life, making it pointless for them to attack you with the creature in the first place. If you want to put this effect on creatures your opponents control, use Spirit Link since it only costs 1 white and it doesn't buff them or do anything else like that. If you want to lean harder into control, we can use auras like Darksteel Mutation, Lignify, Reprobation, and Kenrith's Mutation to turn their best creature into their worst. It's still a creature that can be buffed, but turning Elish Norn into a bug is absolutely amazing. Faithbound Judge is a 4/4 spirit soldier with Defender, Flying, and Vigilance. It can lose Defender if it gains enough counters at your upkeep, but casting this for its disturb cost could win you the game. Its flip side is Sinner's Judgment, a curse that says at the beginning of your upkeep put a judgment counter on it. Then, if there are 3 or more counters on it, enchanted player loses the game. The best scenario here is to disturb this onto a player, then attack with a creature, putting a copy of the curse on another opponent. If you do this, you're absolutely being targeted out of the game, so how about we do some protection then? Ghostly Prison is great on its own, but even having 1 more copy of it will make it nearly impossible to attack you. Sphere of Safety will mean your opponents need to wipe your board of enchantments if they want to attack you at all. Arborea is tricky, but if you have the right enchantments on the field, you won't need to cast any more spells anyway. It's an enchantment that says creatures can't attack a player unless that player cast a spell or put a non-token permanent onto the battlefield during their turn. It works for your opponents too, so it might be really tricky to use, but it's still an option. Some other handy global enchantments that would be great copy targets would be ones that actively give you something that you can stack up for greater value. Court of Grace will give you spirits at your upkeep, and if you enchant them, it becomes easy to trigger Calix since they have flying too. But if you manage to hold Monarch until your next turn, you get 4/4 Angels instead, and you'll get 1 token creature each upkeep for each copy of Court of Grace on your field. Any of the better landfall enchantments would be really effective with multiple copies of the enchantments on the field. Retreat to Kazandu will put counters on a target creature or gain you 2 life. Retreat to Ameria will get you a 1/1 core creature, or your creatures will get +1/+1 until end of turn. Felidar Retreat will get you a 2/2 kitty cat, or put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control and give them vigilance until end of turn. And then there's Colony Heart Expedition. If you choose to duplicate this one, you'll be able to put counters on each as land enters, and then sack them to get the lands when they get 3 counters. Protection of the Heckma is overcosted and inefficient, but if you get multiple copies of it on the field, it will slow down your opponent's aristocrat damage and stop red pingers altogether. It costs 4 and a white and says if a source an opponent controls would deal damage to you, prevent 1 of that damage. This doesn't stop life loss, so some aristocrat cards will still get around it. But if you manage to get 2 or even 3 copies of this on the field, your opponents are going to have to be swinging for a lot of damage to even hurt you. But if budget isn't an option, or you already have these expensive cards, Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, and Anointed Procession would be perfect includes, since they'll double the enchantment tokens you get, and as a result, double the counters your creatures will get. And in the case of Doubling Season, you get to do some wild math with this. Now, if you want to focus on counters for your creatures, then we can just dip into enchantments that support a counter strategy. Hardened Scales, Forced Adaptation, Predatory Hunger, and Hydra's Growth will all make your creatures pretty hard to deal with. Invasion of Gobakhan could be useful here also. It's a battle for 1 and a white with a defensive 3. When it ETBs, you look at an opponent's hand and exile a non-land card from it. Then they can cast it from exile for 2 more mana. Its flip side is Light Shield Array, an enchantment that says at the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 counter on each creature that attacked this turn. Then you can also sacrifice it to give your creatures hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. If you have multiple copies of this out, then you can protect your creatures multiple times, as well as putting stupid amount of counters on them. Once your creatures are massive, giving them trample will be the most effective way to close out the game or continue to make copies of your enchantments. Bramblewood Paragon, Dusk Shell Crawler, and Gnarled Colony will give your creatures with 1/1 counters on them trample. And since Calix will make tokens of any enchantments, there are a few handy enchantment creatures that will make this deck run much smoother. Aegis of the Gods will give you hexproof. Jukai Naturalist has lifelink and will make your enchantment spells cost 1 less to cast. Sithis will let you draw a card and gain a life whenever you cast an enchantment spell. Then the Constellation keyword is one to look out for. It triggers an ability when an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control. Citizen Champion will get a counter and let you draw a card, while Eidolon of Blossom will just let you draw a card. Archon of Sun's Grace will give you a 2/2 Flying Pegasus, and it will give all of your Pegasus creatures lifelink, making them great attacking creatures to trigger Calix if they're enchanted. The best choice for protection in this deck, besides the obvious instants and equipments, would be the different Umbras. The Umbras are great since they could be sacked to protect a creature and then duplicated to protect it again. Gift of Immortality might be okay. It can't return to the battlefield at the end of the turn since the token ceases to exist when it hits the graveyard. But the creature will still return to the battlefield and be available to be enchanted again if needed. Indestructibility is a great choice to make any permanent on the field indestructible, including itself and other auras, which could be pretty funny. Classic Voltron enchantments like Ethereal Armor are fine includes, but Spirit Mantle might be an auto-include in every single Calix deck. It'll let the creature deal combat damage freely to duplicate your enchantments, including this one if there's no other target. After you choose a direction and throw in the best pieces that'll work for your game plan, the rest of the slots will be your usual choices for removal, ramp, and whatever other pieces you like. Maybe Denethor, New Benali's Light in the same set, that'll let you cast an aura or equipment from your graveyard once during your turn. 1/1 counters and stacks will probably be what most Calix decks will end up being, since that strategy is pretty narrow. It's not a bad thing though. There are plenty of enchantments in white and green that enable enough variation in the strategy to make the narrow strategy reasonably interesting. But that's about it for this EDH concept deck for Calix Guided by Fate. Let me know in the comments below how you would build it and what you think the strongest enchantment is for this deck also. But until next time, like the video if you liked the video, dislike it if you disliked it, and until next time, I'm Space Coconut, and you're welcome.